my neighbor's been chainsawing a tree, so hopefully that doesn't happen again. So hopefully you appreciate this video. What this is about I've been building a potential comic that's going to involve a graffiti artist that has powers, who's originally from Iran, comes to the United States, meets up with graffiti artists. His background is Persian calligraphy, and he kind of takes to it and finds an interest in this new art form. And so I thought that, like, while I'm building this character's vernacular of their graffiti art, I might talk about how to make graffiti that's somewhat authentic, you know, because I'm not a pro myself, but it's somewhat authentic for artists that are comic artists, that are game developers, so that it makes logical sense within the environment that they're trying to build. It might be beneficial to y'all. So for me, what I think that the fundamental, like the basis of all graffiti, of strong graffiti, is the hand style, or sometimes what people call the tag. The shape of it and the way it looks kind of is overall important. And the way to make it look sound is to build it with angular lines and lines that feel as though they have structure. And to draw it a lot, like sometimes people fill entire pages with this until they get something that, like, I didn't. It's not the best hand style. Again, I'm not a pro. I'm fully aware of that, but this person's also learning, so I think it's okay. But what you need, again, is angles and structure. You think about, like, these straight lines, these vertical kind of lines, as they're really like the scaffolding to the letter forms to hold them up. So, like, you have like this clean stroke line, and then a spine of it, and then that downward stroke. The circle, I just did a circle to be simple, but some artists will also sometimes do, like, you know, an X or something to be to add a little bit of a flair or flourish to it, and then you know, straight, pretty much straight, just slightly bowed, angle, angle, straight down, curve shape, angle, angle. And this helps build the overall structure, again, of what's going to be the foundation of the rest of the styles of this particular graffiti artist. Other things that people sometimes do are sometimes quotation marks, you know, on the sides of the words, which can be kind of a nice flourish. Sometimes people also will have, will do like an arrow to kind of add something to it. Another common practice, and I have to shrink this down a bit to do it, is to do a halo over it, or to do a crown. And the crown is to basically say, like, I'm the king of, you know, I'm the best graffiti artist or whatever. And then, you know, underlines, of course, like other things that are pretty common in general with type. Now this is going to be basically, like I said, this is going to be the basis for all the other letters. And to this shape, and I'm going to reduce the opacity on it a little bit, this shape is what's going to now be the characteristics. And then I'm just going to do a regular hard round. I've downloaded a graffiti kind of spray paint brush, but it's a bit difficult to see at this scale anyways. And I'll just create a new layer. It's what we call a straight letter, and this will be like the foundation of that style. So basically just building, you know, if I was to sketch this, it's just going to be like these straight kind of cuts, and these straight cuts are pretty much like the same width, but as you can see, they pretty much just follow my, you know, they pretty much just follow the overall shape of the hand style, and this makes, you know, for an easy straight letter. graffiti typeface. And I know I'm carrying it through because the idea is that, like, well, if this was actual, you know, calligraphy, you know, it's gonna be, you know, that way. And drawing letters is always kind of somewhat difficult for me because I am left-handed, and so I always can't see some of what I'm drawing. So yeah, so you can see it. So I'm going to turn off those other layers, and so this is going to be the overall structure for my, what we call, straight letter. Now something like this might be in an area, you could build something like this in a on a rooftop or in a more hidden environment, but it's probably not going to be something, you know, that's going to be displayed in a high trafficked location. Tag wheel, what we call throw-ups wheel, those are a little bit different. I'm going to talk about them very briefly in the future. And it's important that you know that, and you can find all this terminology online, but it's good to know that because if you want it to be authentic, like, people aren't doing full-on multicolored, like 10-color graffiti pieces out in the middle of the street, you know, where it's highly trafficked, unless they're getting paid to do it, or maybe it's at a skate park, you know, where that, like, you know, or a free wall, you know, where people are allowed to do graffiti freely. Not so much out in the open, which is something that you shouldn't do. So if you're trying to make it look authentic urban environment, for that, tags, throw-ups, stickers, you know, that style of graffiti would be there. I'm going to mute this, and I'm just going to do the letter S to show some of the formal elements for the letters. And again, to reiterate, you know, I have these straight kind of angular shapes combined with the curved shapes, and this again helps build some structure. The contrast in leaning a curved line against something that is has some more structure to it overall, that's going to be important. So to build that letter S, I'm just going to create a new one. I might start out with you know, a color. And what typically what artists do in the way that they paint things, and this is also important because oftentimes I see graffiti artists in comics, they'll treat the coloring or the filling in of the colors more like a coloring book and less like graffiti's actually done, where nobody does their outlines first and then fills it in, like the black outline with a color. They typically are doing the base colors first and then filling them in. They're also typically filling them in, like I see how I build the structure in this manner, where it's like up, and then you might tighten up, you know, the edges, and that's how each one's going to get filled in. Now I'm just going to fill this in because I am using a computer, using the paint bucket tool to make it faster. Then what you might do is you might do what we call, there's a lot of what we call a fill, and, you know, fills, you know, sometimes people call them doodads. Circular shapes is a pretty generic kind of fill, but they're not like, you know, they're kind of like attached to each other, you know, almost like if they were bubbles floating in a drink or something. And you might also do something where, like, I'm gonna reduce the hardness of this brush and do a gradient from one top to bottom is a pretty common thing as well. And then once that's there, you might use the teal to then create, gotta change the hardness, the teal to then create bubbles on the opposite side, you know, that cut in to create this overall fill. You can even like cut in like where it meets, and then same thing for the red, cutting in to this. Okay, then the next step that somebody would typically do is they would build the outlines of the piece on the edge, and this will clean up and unify some of the overall work. and then 3Ds added to that. Now, without 3Ds, I think it oftentimes doesn't look like graffiti, and I've seen a couple of comics that do this where there's no 3Ds. And for me, without 3Ds, there's something about it that just doesn't feel like graffiti anymore. And again, I'm just going to use my paint bucket to fill this in because I'm being lazy. Then what somebody might do, there's a couple other formal elements. There's what we call an inline. An inline is, or an inner gel. An inline or an inner gel can be like a lighter color, or it might be a highlight. So the inline or the highlight can be done in different ways. Personally, what I like to do is I sometimes like to do a broken up line to kind of, as an aesthetic choice, that can also be a little bit easier than perfectly trying to catch the interior space. Now with graffiti, you have typically people have like different nozzles for spray cans, and those nozzles will change the overall quality and line quality and thickness of it. The standard cap sizes are there's a that is the most generic maybe is the New York Fat and the New York Thin. The New York Thin is used for what it sounds like, thinner lines, and a New York Fat is used for thicker areas. So you would use that to fill in your graffiti piece, and then you would use the New York Thin to create more of the details and that sort of thing on the graffiti piece. It's something that I can't really do in Photoshop. It's I can kind of maybe mess with the hardness, but you could add like kind of like blings that sometimes people do, and then they'll go in with the New York Fat Thin from like far away and potentially sort of spray these kind of X's kind of elements to it, which can be quite nice. Other thing that's pretty common, what people would potentially do next, is to then do some highlights inside the 3Ds. So typically doing it, get my hardness back up, typically doing it kind of where the edge of the line might be for that particular line. And again, just talking about the order a little bit, even though it's digital, because I think that that's important if you're trying to do a character who is a graffiti artist to be, from panel to panel for cartoonists, or in a video potentially if you're a game developer, so that you get it right instead of, having it out of order again to try to make it look a little bit more authentic. And then you might go back in, and the artist would then pretty much like, potentially square off these lines, or even cut, into some of them so that they're a bit cleaner. Edgewise, and you might even do that with the inline, up to you. I think that would be super time consuming and difficult if I was a writer, and I would not want to do that sort of thing, but whatever. And then the last thing would be the outer gel. So the outer gel, sometimes I like calling it a force field just because I think it's funny personally, but then that would go, and I'm just picking these colors arbitrarily, that would go on the outside. Sometimes people have multiple layers, so they might have a darker color and then progressively get brighter as you go on. And if that was the case, you would really start with potentially like a thicker line first and then do an interior one. But I'm just going to do one just to show again the process, and that would be done actually before the blings, because otherwise I'm basically painting over a highlight, but that's fine. I don't really, I'm not really concerned about it. But you would just go all the way, all the way around. And then again, you could go back in and clean up some of these areas if it was necessary. And to bring the blings back, I could by just going back to my low hardness and kind of painting back over these. But yeah, that's pretty much the different phases. Now to talk about how to move that from like a straight letter, and regardless of whether it's straight letter or something else, you would move that to something more sophisticated. And for that, it might be like a what we call a wild style. Okay, so this is basically what a the different steps, but it could be much cleaner. If I was gonna actually paint it, you just keep going back in and cleaning up the overall quality. Another thing you can do to fix like random mistakes is to add additional doodads. So like I could add additional circles coming off of things to fix some of the problems in different areas. And I do that kind of stuff all the time, where I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like add additional decorations, and eventually it'll start to look cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And so this basically will then be the fundamental structure for what some graffiti artists call a wild style. And there's actually a film called Wild Style, so you can check it out. And I'm going to show that to you. So this is the wild style over top, and I'm going to reduce the quality of this so you can kind of see which you can hopefully kind of see like the overall shift. So it's basically, actually I might just turn these off. I think that might be better. It's basically what it is this is building off of something this complex is basically building one step built off of what we call that straight letter. So to show you where the straight letter is, it's pretty evident. It's basically, right here. Right? Like that's essentially the S from the straight letter, and then the O, and then the L, it's a little bit more evident, and then the H. It's pretty much the same thing, except there's additional parts. So with these and exaggeration. So this cut goes deeper in, or maybe I should use a different color so that's more evident. So you have these additional appendages almost that add detail and add complexity to this. And one of the things I did with this, because it's Iranian, is I thought that the additional aspect of doing calligraphy is that the Persian calligraphy does a lot of repetition and overlap, so I thought it'd be cool to play around with that. So I just basically like put the letters, that's what this is. This element is basically the same serif, what we call serifin typography, over top. This is the same curve of the S, but then it also is cutting into the overall shape of the letter, and that's kind of how you end up like adding that complexity. So this is like another stroke on the H. It's an additional one, and as it builds and builds and builds and becomes more and more complicated, there's other formal elements that I might add, like these circles, to kind of add some additional interest, additional compelling visual interest. Now with this, another way to start the overall shape, instead of just building it off of the straight letter, is to build it off of other visual shapes in general. So like in this case, like that piece is basically a trapezoid, and that's pretty common. You might also build your letters within a circle, but again, basing the overall structure off of that initial straight letter. Anchored is pretty common, except with anchored, what I had to do, of course, with the S is that instead of going, down so low where we're not going to see the stroke, it had to curve back up to be able to see the rest of the character. But it's pretty much the same thing, and the same thing for the L. The L went down more at an angle. This time it's almost vertical, so it went more like, like that, instead of doing that, having the straight things. And then the same thing for the H, which also went down. Now it's more horizontal. And again, adding doodads, adding shapes, and adapting those. So this would be something that you would see on trains or anchored on the bottom of a wall versus something that you would see floating. Another one that's one of my favorites is the pear-shaped kind of letter form, where it's kind of distorted. It's a little bit more asymmetrically balanced. It's a little bit more dynamic as a result. But again, it's still, it's still that same straight letter is built in, but now it's like squished essentially, because instead, so like this straight letter that was here, is now, oops, gotta hold shift key down now, it's basically kind of like that, with a little bit more distortion, right? But it's pretty much like, again, built off that straight letter, which is built off of the hand style. And then to make it even more complex, there's additional elements that I did quick sketches for, which is like the trapezoid, adding these loops, these additional loops to create more dynamic qualities, and then these straight cuts, which create, kind of connect the letters, almost like black letter type. And the recent comic I read that does this is the oh, now I can't think of it. The Prince of Cats. So the Prince of Cats, there's a graffiti artist, and their letter forms do that kind of, utilize that sort of aesthetic. And then, of course, the loops and then arrows are oftentimes used as another formal element to pull from it. I did this also with the pear-shaped variant, and then I also added, to show yet another approach, is these little cuts that break up the letter forms even more so, and that can be another great formal element to just add a level of complexity to the graffiti. And so for the rest of this video, hopefully that gave you an idea of how to build the letters so that they're a little bit structurally stronger for comics and for miniatures or for game development. And I'm going to go through basically the entire process of painting this graffiti piece using this as basically as my sketch. Like, I'm going to use this as a sketch, and but do it digitally. Of course, you can make fun of me all you want. I don't mind. It's not really intended to be for graffiti artists. It's meant for people to draw these kinds of things in an environment so that it is a little bit more believable to have some more quality graffiti pieces in the end. All right. Alright, so this is it. I just added a texture and put in a brick background to make it look a little bit more authentic. This outer gel or force field is really helping it separate from the background. That's why I chose this like jungle green, this very rich jungle green kind of style color. And you know, it has all the formal elements that I mentioned previously in the video. Again, this is something that wouldn't be seen in high traffic areas. It would be in areas that are less trafficked or that might be legal. So it might be on a building adjacent to another building, on a rooftop. It might be something that you might paint on a train if you can be hidden, or inside of a tunnel, or an abandoned building, things of that nature, places that, you know, don't have a lot of traffic or people walking around. Other things, if you want, you could look up roller pieces. That's another thing that people will do because they're very quick. They use actually paint bucket and paint roller. That's why they're called roller pieces. And the other thing that you might do is called a throw up, which I'll briefly go over. So this is a throw up, very simple kind of bubble letter style thing, what most people are more familiar with out there. And this, you know, just to show you, you know, again, straight lines, straight angles, and then, you know, the curves to create that contrast and to build that overall structure for them. And then if I was to do what we call a two-color throw up, this would be something where it would look, you know, like this, where it's filled in. So you have your filled in, you would paint that yellow first, and then the blue would go over top of it. And that would be the kind of thing that you would see more commonly outdoors. So anyways, review, you know, you can play around with this, do a lot of sketching at home, really get that hand style down before you start building and building and building to a point where you're doing something as chaotic and complex as this, and have fun with it. Good luck.